Shadows of Justice. The FBI director's crusade against corruption. Rain lashed against the windows of the FBI's Chicago field office, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the tension coiling in Malcolm Wright's chest. He stood alone in the dimly lit restroom, scrubbing his hands under a cold stream, the faint sting of overworked skin mimicking blood in the flickering fluorescent light. His reflection stared back, deep brown eyes sharp but weary, jaw set with a resolve forged through decades of navigating a system that often judged his race before his rank. At 42, Malcolm was the newly appointed director of the FBI's Illinois division, a role that carried the weight of a city's fractured trust. His tailored charcoal suit was crisp, but the exhaustion in his posture betrayed the hours he'd spent poring over reports that painted a grim portrait of Chicago's underbelly. Corruption so entrenched, it seemed to pulse beneath the city's streets like a second heartbeat. A sharp knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. "Director Wright, you still in there?" It was Lena Carter, his deputy, her voice steady but laced with concern, the kind that came from knowing the stakes he faced, not just as a director, but as a black man in a city where power often hid a darker agenda. "I'm fine," Malcolm called back, adjusting his tie with a practiced flick. His FBI badge, clipped to his belt, caught the light as he stepped into the hallway, the sterile hum of the office enveloping him. The place was a ghost town this late, the clock ticking past 11:45 p.m. Most agents had left hours ago, their desks abandoned, leaving only the buzz of servers and the rustle of papers scattered across conference tables. Lena stood by the door, her tablet glowing faintly, her navy blazer as sharp as her mind. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes held a mix of loyalty and unease. "You've been at it since dawn," she said, her tone a blend of reprimand and respect. "You need to rest, sir. You're no good to anyone burned out." Malcolm grabbed his overcoat from the rack, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Rest? With these files haunting me? Not tonight, Lena." The humor was a thin veil over the truth. The files weren't just paperwork. They were a ledger of corruption, police misconduct, tampered evidence, racial profiling, and complaints buried under layers of bureaucratic silence. Reports detailed officers targeting Black and Latino communities in neighborhoods like Inglewood and Humboldt Park, evidence vanishing from lockup, and internal investigations that stalled without explanation. Each page was a piece of a larger, uglier puzzle, one Malcolm had been tasked with solving when he took the director's chair 3 months ago. Lena's eyes softened, but her voice held steady. "Let me call you a car. It's pouring out there, and you've got enough on your plate without slipping on wet roads." "I've got my own wheels," Malcolm said, brushing off her concern with a wave. But her gaze lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the scrutiny he faced, not just from the public, but from within the system itself. As a black man in his position, every move was watched, every decision dissected, every success met with whispers of doubt or resentment. He was used to it, but the weight never lessened. He nodded to Lena, a gesture of gratitude for her loyalty, and headed for the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Outside, Chicago was a canvas of wet asphalt and flickering neon, the rain painting the city in streaks of silver and shadow. The Willis Tower loomed in the distance, its spire piercing the low clouds, a symbol of ambition that felt hollow against the city's grittier realities: poverty, violence, and a system that often failed those it swore to protect. Malcolm slid into his sleek black SUV, the engine purring to life as he pulled onto Michigan Avenue. The rain battered the roof, a steady rhythm that matched the churn of his thoughts. He'd spent the day dissecting coded police radio chatter, missing body cam footage, and names that kept resurfacing in hushed complaints. Officers, sergeants, even a deputy chief. The system wasn't just flawed, it was rotten, and Malcolm was here to carve out the decay. He turned onto a quiet stretch of Lakeshore Drive, where upscale condos and boutique storefronts lined the road, their polished facades gleaming under streetlights. The Gold Coast neighborhood screamed wealth, its manicured lawns and wrought iron gates a stark contrast to the city's rougher corners. Bronzeville, Inglewood, places where the system's failures hit hardest, where families lived in fear of both crime and those meant to stop it. Malcolm's SUV, understated but expensive, blended in, but he knew better than to assume he belonged here in the eyes of some. His presence, a black man in a luxury vehicle, was enough to draw suspicion in a neighborhood like this. Badge or no badge, red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror, slicing through the rain like a warning shot. Malcolm's grip tightened on the wheel, his pulse steady, but his senses sharpening like a blade. A patrol car closed in, its siren giving a single, piercing wail before falling silent. He pulled over smoothly, the SUV idling under a dripping street lamp, its light casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Training took over. Hands visible on the wheel, posture calm, eyes forward. He'd been through this before, not as a director, but as a young man growing up in Chicago's South Side, where stops like this were a fact of life. The patrol car's door opened, and heavy boots splashed through puddles, each step deliberate. The officer approached, his frame broad and imposing, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His nameplate read, J. Brennan. His flashlight swept over Malcolm's face, lingering with a scrutiny that felt like a challenge, its beam harsh against the dim interior of the SUV. "Evening," Brennan said, his voice clipped, devoid of warmth, the word more command than greeting. "Mind telling me what you're doing around here?" Malcolm kept his tone even, his eyes meeting Brennan's without flinching. "Driving home." Brennan's eyes narrowed, scanning Malcolm's tailored suit, the SUV's leather interior, the silver watch on his wrist, a gift from his late father, a reminder of hard-won success. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area," Brennan said, his tone flat but heavy with implication. "Step out of the car, please." The words hit like a practiced script, laced with an undercurrent Malcolm recognized instantly. Suspicion rooted not in evidence, but in bias. He considered reaching for his badge, tucked in his coat pocket, its weight a quiet reassurance. But something stopped him, a gut instinct honed by years of navigating these moments. Brennan's hand twitched toward his radio, his voice low but clear as he pressed the button. "Got a live one. Fits the profile, bringing him in." Malcolm's jaw clenched, the word profile landing like a punch. It was a dog whistle, heavy with intent, a reminder of the countless times he'd been reduced to a stereotype. This wasn't a random stop. It was a move in a larger game, one he'd seen play out too many times, on street corners, in courtrooms, in the lives of those he'd sworn to protect. He decided to play along, for now, to see how deep the rot went. "All right," he said, his voice calm, as he opened the door and stepped into the rain, the night air sharp against his skin, the cold biting through his suit. Brennan's smirk was faint but unmistakable, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. "Smart move." The cuff snapped on with deliberate force, the cold metal biting into Malcolm's wrists, not enough to bruise but enough to make a point. He didn't flinch, his mind already dissecting the scene. Brennan's casual arrogance, the second officer, Monsieur Torres, lingering by the patrol car, his silhouette tense in the rain, the faint crackle of a radio transmission. This was a performance, a ritual, and Malcolm was letting it unfold, gathering pieces of the puzzle with every step, every word, every glance. The drive to the precinct was tense, the city blurring past in streaks of rain and neon. Brennan drove with one hand, his posture relaxed, but his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, watching Malcolm with a mix of curiosity and contempt. Torres, in the passenger seat, glanced back, his face unreadable but his voice probing. "You live around here?" he asked, the question deceptively casual, a test Malcolm had no intention of engaging. Malcolm didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the precinct ahead, its concrete bulk looming through the storm like a fortress built to keep secrets. They pulled into a side alley, avoiding the main entrance's cameras, a deliberate choice that set Malcolm's instincts on edge. No witnesses, no record. His pulse stayed steady, but his mind raced, cataloging every detail. The alley's narrow walls, the flicker of a broken street lamp, the coded mutterings from Brennan's radio. This was a setup, and he was walking into it blind, but not unprepared. Inside, they led him through a dimly lit corridor, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and damp concrete. Offices lined the hall, their doors half open, revealing cluttered desks, faded commendations, and a bulletin board pinned with missing persons flyers, some yellowed with age. The precinct was a microcosm of the city's contradictions, order on the surface, chaos beneath. Brennan's radio crackled again, a voice muttering about clean paperwork and the boss's orders. Malcolm filed every word away, his silence a weapon as sharp as his badge, his mind mapping the players in this game. In the holding room, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the scuffed linoleum floor. Malcolm sat in a plastic chair, still cuffed, his posture relaxed, but his eyes like steel, scanning the room for tells. Brennan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, exuding control, his smirk lingering like a challenge. Torres paced, muttering to a third officer, a wiry man with a nervous tic named C. Vargas. Their chatter was casual on the surface, talk of shifts, paperwork, the weather. But Malcolm caught the tension beneath, the coded phrases, the quick glances, a shared understanding of something unspoken, something planned. 15 minutes ticked by, the clock on the wall a steady reminder of the game unfolding. The door swung open, and a young officer, T. Ruiz, stepped in, clutching Malcolm's wallet. His eyes widened as he glanced at the ID inside, then at Malcolm, his face draining of color, his hands trembling slightly as he turned to Brennan. Sir," Ruiz stammered, his voice tight with panic. "You need to see this." Brennan frowned, snatching the wallet with a scowl. His eyes scanned the FBI credentials. Malcolm J. Wright, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Illinois Division. The room froze, the air thick with the weight of their error. Brennan's jaw tightened, his confidence splintering like glass under a hammer. Torres stopped pacing, his eyes darting between Malcolm and the wallet, his breath catching in his throat. Vargas shifted uncomfortably, his nervous tic more pronounced, as if he sensed the ground shifting beneath them. Malcolm tilted his head, his voice low and cutting, each word a shard of glass. "Something wrong with my ID, Officer Brennan?" Brennan didn't answer, his face a mask, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic, a man realizing he'd stepped into a trap of his own making. The door burst open again, and a man in a suit stormed in. Captain Raymond Kessler, precinct commander. His face was a storm of shock and fury as he took in the scene, his gaze locking onto Malcolm's cuffed wrists, then the wallet in Brennan's hand. His voice trembled with barely contained rage. "Director Wright," he said, the title heavy with realization. "What the hell is going on here?" Malcolm stood, slow and deliberate, the cuffs still dangling from one wrist, their weight a silent accusation against the room. "That's what I'd like to know, Captain. Why am I in cuffs for driving home? And why did your officer call me a live one on a private radio channel?" Kessler's face flushed, his jaw working as he processed the magnitude of the mistake. He gestured to Ruiz, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Get those cuffs off, now." The metal fell away with a clatter, hitting the floor like a verdict. Malcolm flexed his wrists, his gaze locked on Brennan, who stood rigid, his earlier smugness replaced by a thin veneer of defiance, a man clinging to the illusion of control. "This is a misunderstanding," Kessler said, his tone conciliatory but strained, the words of a man trying to salvage a sinking ship. "We'll sort this out, Director. I assure you." Malcolm's smile was cold, a blade wrapped in civility, sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, I'm sure you will. But I'll be handling that myself." He adjusted his coat, his presence commanding the room, the air crackling with the shift in power. "Officer Brennan, we'll be seeing each other again. Soon." Kessler's voice followed him as he walked out, sharp and clipped, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Brennan, you're on leave. Internal Affairs will be in touch." The words were a bandage on a festering wound, and Malcolm knew it. This wasn't about one cop. It was about the machine behind him, a network of corruption that stretched far beyond this precinct, its roots deep in the city's foundation. And he was just getting started. The next morning, the FBI field office was a hive of controlled chaos, the air thick with purpose. Malcolm stood at the head of a conference table, surrounded by stacks of files, laptops, and a whiteboard scrawled with names, dates, and connections. A map of the city's hidden sins. Lena slid a tablet across the table, her expression grim but focused, her fingers tapping the screen to highlight a list. "Brennan's suspended, but it's a smokescreen. We traced that radio channel. It's encrypted, off the books, and linked to at least a dozen officers, maybe more. Some names go high. Deputy chief level, maybe City Hall." Malcolm scanned the tablet, his eyes narrowing at the list. Names, transfer records, disciplinary reports that never saw daylight. Officers with histories of excessive force, racial profiling, evidence tampering, all buried or dismissed. Complaints from Black and Latino communities in neighborhoods like Austin and Little Village. Whistleblowers silenced, cases closed without investigation. "This isn't just a precinct problem," he said, his voice low, a quiet storm brewing. "It's a network. Cops, sergeants, even a city council member. Someone's been pulling strings for years, protecting their own." Agent Daniel Park entered, his face taut, a folder tucked under his arm. "IA's here with preliminary findings. That radio channel, it's tied to a clique within the department. They've been targeting undesirables, their word, for years. Code words, private meetups, even payoffs to keep complaints quiet. We've got names, but it's messy. Goes beyond the precinct, maybe beyond the city." Malcolm listened, his face a mask of calm, but his mind was a storm of calculation, piecing together fragments of evidence into a larger picture. This was bigger than he'd feared, a shadow network operating with impunity, protected by layers of loyalty, bureaucracy, and fear. They'd miscalculated, thinking he was just another target, another black man to be intimidated or silenced. Now, they'd handed him the key to their unraveling, and he intended to turn it. When the room cleared, Lena stayed behind, her eyes searching his, a mix of concern and resolve. "You could have ended it last night, flashed the badge, walked away clean." Malcolm's gaze drifted to the city skyline beyond the window, the rain-washed spires of Chicago glinting under a gray dawn. The Willis Tower stood tall, a symbol of ambition that felt hollow against the city's darker truths, communities fractured by systemic neglect, lives lost to a system that valued power over justice. "I didn't want to walk away," he said, his voice low but steady, each word carrying the weight of resolve. "I wanted to see how deep this goes." Lena nodded, understanding the unspoken. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person they'd targeted, every case they'd buried, Every life dismissed by a system that thrived on silence. The fight was personal now, and Malcolm wasn't playing defense. He was going on the offensive, and the city would feel the tremors. Days later, the precinct was a circus, a chaotic swirl of noise and light. News vans clogged the street, their satellite dishes piercing the sky, cameras flashing as reporters jostled for a shot, their voices a cacophony of questions and accusations. Malcolm watched from a nearby diner, his baseball cap low, blending into the morning crowd of commuters and early risers. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet pavement and diesel, the city's pulse thrumming beneath the surface. Brennan emerged from a side door, cuffed and flanked by internal affairs agents, his face a mask of defiance, but his eyes betrayed fear, a man who'd played the game too long and finally lost. The reporters shouted, their voices cutting through the crowd. Corruption in the department? How deep does it go? Is this systemic racism at play? Malcolm sipped his coffee, its bitterness grounding him, his gaze steady as he cataloged every detail. The reporter's frenzy, the agent's tense postures, the crowd's mix of anger and hope. Brennan's arrest was just the opening move, a single thread in a tangled web that stretched far beyond this moment. His phone buzzed, and Lena's voice came through, calm but urgent, a lifeline in the chaos. "We've got more. The encrypted channel leads to City Hall. Names, dates, payoffs, council members, a union rep, even a judge. It's bigger than we thought, Malcolm. This could shake the whole city." Malcolm's lips curved into a faint smile, not of triumph, but of resolve, a quiet fire burning in his chest. The web stretched far, beyond the precinct, beyond Chicago's city limits, into the halls of power where deals were made in back rooms and complaints vanished into the ether. But it wasn't unbreakable. Across the street, Brennan was loaded into an unmarked car, his eyes catching Malcolm's for a split second. Recognition flickered, then dread, a silent acknowledgement that the hunter had become the hunted. Malcolm pocketed his phone and stepped into the street, the city's pulse thrumming around him, a living thing that both resisted and demanded change. The fight would be brutal, months, maybe years, of digging through lies, payoffs, and cover-ups. Witnesses would need protection, evidence would need to be secured, and the political fallout would be seismic. But as the Chicago skyline loomed against the gray sky, Malcolm felt a fire in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but resolve, sharp and unyielding, a blade honed by years of fighting battles no one else would. "They thought they could play me," he murmured, his voice lost in the city's hum, the words a promise to himself, to the city, to the people who'd been silenced. Let them keep thinking that. Weeks later, Malcolm stood in a packed briefing room, the air thick with tension, the hum of purpose almost tangible. Agents, internal affairs officers, and federal prosecutors filled the space, their faces a mix of determination and unease, each aware of the storm they were about to unleash. On the table before them lay the fruits of their work: wiretaps, financial records, intercepted emails, and a list of names that reached into the city's highest offices. The network was sprawling but fragile, held together by arrogance and fear, and Malcolm was dismantling it piece by piece, each revelation a blow to its foundation. Lena stood beside him, her tablet displaying a digital map of connections, cops to council members, payoffs to silenced witnesses, a deputy chief linked to a real estate tycoon with a vested interest in keeping certain neighborhoods under control. "We've got enough to start indictments," she said, her voice steady but laced with the weight of what was coming. "But this will shake the city, Malcolm. Maybe the state. They'll fight back. Hard." Malcolm nodded, his eyes on the skyline beyond the window, the city's spires glinting under a rare break in the clouds, a fleeting moment of clarity in a city shrouded in shadow. "Let it shake," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, a vow carved in steel. "If it's rotten, we tear it down and build it back right." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a storm, heavy with the promise of change and the cost it would demand. This wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning, a battle to reclaim a city from those who'd twisted its systems for their own gain. And Malcolm Wright, the man they'd tried to break, was leading the charge, his resolve a beacon in the chaos. The investigation deepened, each revelation peeling back another layer of Chicago's corrupt underbelly, exposing veins of rot that ran deeper than Malcolm had imagined. His team worked tirelessly, cross-referencing financial records with police reports, tracing encrypted communications to burner phones, and interviewing witnesses who'd been too scared to speak until now. One such witness, a former precinct clerk named Maria Alvarez, provided a critical piece of the puzzle, a ledger detailing off-the-books payments to officers for special assignments. These assignments, she explained in a hushed meeting in a Southside coffee shop, often involved intimidating activists, tampering with evidence, or ensuring certain arrests never made it to court. Maria's hands trembled as she slid the ledger across the table, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting someone to burst through. "I kept a copy," she said, her voice cracking. "I knew it was wrong, but I needed the job. They threatened my family if I talked. My son, he's only 12. They knew where he went to school." Malcolm's gaze was steady, his voice calm but firm, a lifeline in her fear. "You're doing the right thing now, Maria. We'll protect you and your son. You have my word." Maria nodded, tears welling in her eyes, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "It's not just the cops, it's bigger. They mentioned a fixer, someone high up pulling strings. I don't know who, but they were scared of him, even the sergeants." Malcolm filed the information away, his mind already connecting dots, weaving a tapestry of suspicion. A fixer. Someone with enough power to orchestrate this network, to keep it hidden for years, to silence those who dared to speak. The ledger was a gold mine, linking names to payments, dates to incidents, a roadmap to the heart of the corruption. It was enough to widen the net, to bring in more suspects, to shake the foundations of the city's power structure. Back at the field office, Malcolm briefed his team, the room crackling with purpose, the air heavy with the weight of their task. "This ledger gives us leverage," he said, holding up the document, its pages worn but damning. "We follow the money, we find the fixer, but we move carefully. They're watching us now, and they'll do anything to protect their own." Lena nodded, her tablet displaying a new set of connections, her fingers tracing lines between names and accounts. "We've traced some of the payments to a shell company tied to a real estate developer, Victor Grayson. He's got ties to City Hall, the police union, even the governor's office. His projects are all in neighborhoods targeted by this network, gentrification zones where arrests spiked, where communities were pushed out." Malcolm's jaw tightened, his mind flashing to Grayson's name, seen before in campaign finance reports, mentioned in passing by community leaders who'd accused him of strong-arming residents out of their homes. Grayson was a shadow figure, a man who operated in boardrooms and back rooms, his wealth and influence a shield against scrutiny. "Dig deeper," Malcolm said, his voice low but resolute. "I want everything on Grayson, his finances, his contacts, his projects. If he's the fixer, we'll prove it." The team dispersed, each agent diving into their assigned tasks with a fervor born of purpose. Malcolm stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard, its sprawling web of names and connections, a testament to the scale of their fight. He thought of Maria, of her son, of the countless others who'd been silenced, intimidated, or worse by a system that valued power over people. This wasn't just about justice. It was about breaking a cycle, about ensuring the system couldn't keep devouring its own. The weeks that followed were a blur of late nights and high-stakes moves, the field office a war room of activity. Malcolm's team uncovered a trail of evidence linking Grayson to the network, bank transfers to officers, emails discussing problem areas in the city, even a recorded conversation where Grayson referred to the police as his private security. The fixer was no myth. He was real, and his influence was vast, a spider at the center of a web that spanned the city's power structure. But the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Malcolm received anonymous threats, letters slipped under his door, voicemails left in the dead of night, their voices distorted, but their intent clear. His SUV was vandalized, its tires slashed outside his apartment, a crude message scrawled in red paint. "Back off." Lena urged him to take a security detail, her voice tight with worry. "You're a target now, Malcolm. They know you're coming for them." He refused, his jaw set, his eyes hard. "I won't hide," he said, his voice firm, unyielding. "They want me scared. They're gonna be disappointed." The turning point came when a whistleblower from the mayor's office, a young aide named Jamal Carter, contacted Malcolm directly. They met in a park on the west side, the wind whipping through the bare trees, the city's skyline a distant silhouette. Jamal was nervous, his eyes darting as he handed over a USB drive, his hands shaking. "This has everything," he said, his voice low, barely audible over the wind. "Emails, memos, recordings. The mayor's office knew about the network. They let it happen. Grayson's got them in his pocket." Malcolm took the drive, his expression unreadable, his mind already racing. "Why now, Jamal?" The aide swallowed hard, his breath visible in the cold air, a bitter smile on his lips. "I grew up in Inglewood. I saw what they did to my neighbors, my friends. I thought working for the mayor would let me change things, but it's all a lie. I can't stay quiet anymore." Malcolm nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes, a recognition of the courage it took to stand against the machine. "You're doing the right thing. We'll keep you safe." Jamal shook his head, his smile fading. "Safe? Nobody's safe when you're up against Grayson. But I'm done running." The USB drive was a bombshell, a Pandora's box of evidence that blew the investigation wide open. It contained proof of collusion at the highest levels, meetings between Grayson and the mayor's chief of staff, memos outlining strategies to suppress community protests, recordings of Grayson boasting about his untouchable network. It was enough to bring down not just the police department, but the city's entire power structure, a house of cards built on lies and greed. Malcolm called an emergency meeting with his team, the room electric with anticipation, the air crackling with the weight of what they'd uncovered. "This is it," he said, holding up the drive, its small size belying its devastating power. "We've got the fixer, the network, the proof. But we need to move fast. Grayson's got eyes everywhere, and he'll burn this city down before he lets us take him." Lena's voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce, a warrior ready for battle. "What's the play?" Malcolm's gaze was unyielding, a fire burning behind his calm exterior. "We go public. Indictments, press conference, all of it. They thrive in the dark. Let's drag them into the light." The press conference was a spectacle, the federal courthouse swarming with reporters, protesters, and onlookers, a sea of faces reflecting the city's divided soul. Malcolm stood at the podium, flanked by Lena and Daniel, his presence commanding despite the chaos. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward as he laid out the case with surgical precision, a network of corruption spanning the police department, city hall, and beyond. He named names: Brennan, Grayson, the mayor's chief of staff, each one landing like a thunderclap, reverberating through the crowd. "This isn't about a few bad apples," Malcolm said, his voice resonating through the chaos, steady and unyielding. "It's about a system that's been rigged to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. We're tearing it down, piece by piece, and we won't stop until justice is served." The crowd erupted, a wave of sound washing over the courthouse steps, some cheering, their voices filled with hope, others shouting in anger or disbelief, their faith in the system shaken. The city was abuzz with reaction, conversations spilling into coffee shops, barber shops, and community centers, the air thick with the promise of change and the fear of what it would cost. The mayor's office issued a frantic statement, denying involvement, but the evidence was mounting, and public trust was crumbling like dry sand. Malcolm didn't linger for the cameras, his work too urgent for posturing. He turned, walking back into the courthouse, his steps measured but purposeful, Lena and Daniel at his side. The fight was far from over. New names surfaced daily. New threats emerged in the shadows, each one a reminder of the machine's reach. But for the first time in years, Malcolm felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, the city's foundation cracking under the weight of truth. The machine wasn't invincible, and he had the tools to dismantle it. Back in his office, he stood by the window, the city sprawling below, its skyline a jagged silhouette against the dusk. Lena joined him, her tablet dark for once, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. "You're making enemies," she said, her tone half warning, half admiration, a smile tugging at her lips. Malcolm's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a spark of defiance. "Good. Means we're getting somewhere." She nodded, a spark of pride in her eyes, her loyalty unwavering. "What's next?" Malcolm's gaze returned to the skyline, the city's pulse beating in time with his own, a rhythm of struggle and resilience. "We keep digging," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We don't stop until the rot's gone." The rain had started again, a soft patter against the glass, a reminder that even storms could wash things clean. The real hunt had only just begun, but Malcolm Wright was ready, his resolve a fire that no amount of rain could extinguish. Join us for more stories that ignite conversation and inspire change. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay connected. Share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from, and what do you think of Malcolm's fight? Let's keep the dialogue going.